You owe us everything. You would not have a single dime to your name if it were not for this family." The scream shattered the quiet elegance of my Silicon Valley neighborhood. I stood in the doorway of my custom-built estate, holding a cup of black coffee, staring at the absolute absurdity unfolding on my front porch. The people who abandoned me in the freezing snow 22 years ago were now waving a Forbes magazine in my face, demanding a cut of my $80 million company. I did not scream back. I simply took a sip of my coffee and told them I did not have a family. They thought they could bully me into submission. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who dismantles digital threats for a living, and I was about to trap them in a federal crime they would never see coming. I am Sydney, 34 years old, and I am the CEO and founder of a cybersecurity software company. Before I take you through the incredible events of the past few weeks, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family threw you to the wolves. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when my past decided to knock on my heavy oak front door. On my pristine welcome mat stood Thomas and Brenda, the two people who contributed half of my DNA and exactly 0% of my success. Beside them was Stephanie, my younger sister, clutching a designer handbag she definitely could not afford on her part-time retail salary. She wore that familiar, arrogant smirk I had not seen in over 2 decades. In Thomas's trembling, rage-filled hand was a crumpled copy of this month's Forbes magazine. My face was on the cover right next to the bold headline detailing my $80 million merger. "You think you can just hide away in California and pretend we do not exist?" Brenda shrieked, squeezing out a few highly practiced theatrical tears. "We saw the news, Sydney. $80 million. We are your parents. We raised you. You owe us your fair share of that money." I looked at the three of them. Thomas, with his red face and bulging veins, still looking like a man who believed the world owed him a favor. Brenda playing the fragile victim. Stephanie stepping forward as if she already owned my home. "We need cash, Sydney," Stephanie sneered. "Andre and I are looking at a new house and Dad has debts. You are swimming in money. 20 million is pocket change to you. Hand it over, or we will let the media know how the great Silicon Valley CEO abandons her poor struggling parents." I looked right into Stephanie's eyes. "Your debts are not my problem, Stephanie, and neither is your mortgage. You want millions, learn to code. Put in the 100-hour weeks. Risk everything. Until then you get nothing." Thomas stepped forward, invading my personal space. "It is not extortion, it is a family tax. You are a curse. You have always been a curse." I pressed a single button on my smartwatch linking directly to my gated community's security office. I told them I had 3 trespassers harassing me and requested the local police. "Watch me," I replied, stepping back and shutting the heavy oak door directly in their faces. I heard the muffled sounds of them screaming and banging on the wood, followed a few minutes later by the wail of approaching sirens. They were forced off my property, but I knew this was not the end. To understand the sheer delusion of their demands, you have to understand what happened 22 years ago. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, I was the undisputed scapegoat of our household. Thomas and Brenda were obsessed with appearances, social climbing, and living vastly beyond their means. Stephanie was their golden child, pampered, praised, and groomed to marry rich. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, analytical child who preferred coding on a clunky second-hand computer to attending their country club dinners. I was a stain on their perfect image. When I was 10 years old, Thomas's reckless financial decisions finally caught up with him. He had poured the family's savings into a disastrous, highly leveraged investment scheme that completely imploded. Bankruptcy was not just looming, it had kicked the front door down. But narcissists never take accountability. They need a target. Instead of admitting his monumental failure, Thomas turned to Brenda, who had bizarrely consulted a local psychic. The verdict they reached together was absolute insanity. I was a curse. They genuinely convinced themselves that my quiet nature and weird obsession with computers were bringing bad luck to the household. I will never forget that night in December. It was freezing, the wind howling through the streets, carrying sharp bites of snow. Thomas grabbed my arm, dragged me to the front door, and threw me out onto the icy porch. Brenda tossed a black trash bag containing my few items of clothing out after me. "You are a parasite," Thomas had screamed, his face contorted with misplaced rage. "Take your bad luck and get out of my sight. Do not ever come back." I was 10 years old. I sat on the freezing concrete, clutching that trash bag, watching the lights in my own house turn off one by one. They left me there. No phone, no money, no mercy. I walked 4 miles in the dark, shivering uncontrollably, my tears freezing on my cheeks. If it had not been for Aunt Beverly, I do not know what would have happened to me. Beverly was Thomas's older sister, the black sheep of the family, because she chose to be a middle school math teacher instead of chasing wealth. She found me huddled on her porch 3 hours later. She took me in, legally fought for custody against parents who did not even want me, and raised me with more love and fierce dedication than my biological parents ever possessed. For 22 years, Thomas, Brenda, and Stephanie completely erased me from their lives. No birthdays, no holidays, no high school graduation. When I earned a full-ride scholarship to Stanford, there was silence. When I built my first software program in my dorm room, there was silence. When Aunt Beverly passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving me devastated, they did not even send a single card. I built my empire from the ground up, surviving on cheap noodles, 18-hour coding sessions, and sheer unrelenting willpower. I designed an encryption software that caught the attention of major tech firms, eventually scaling it into a massive enterprise. I did it entirely on my own. Yet now, looking at them on my porch demanding millions because they saw a magazine cover, I felt a profound sense of disgust. They thought they could just walk back into my life and claim the fruits of my labor. They thought they were playing a game of family guilt, but they had just stepped into a corporate battlefield. And in my world, if you identify a threat, you do not just block it, you completely dismantle it. I immediately called my lead corporate attorney. "They are going to launch a smear campaign," I told him. Let them. Let them make as much noise as they want. I want them to feel overconfident." In cybersecurity, when a hostile entity attacks your network, the worst thing you can do is block them immediately. They will just find another way in. Instead, you create a honeypot, a decoy system designed to look vulnerable. You let the attackers in, let them think they are winning, all while you quietly log their every move, gathering the indisputable evidence you need to lock them away forever. My family wanted a war. I was going to give them a federal trap. The very next morning, the real assault began. I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room of my headquarters, reviewing documents for our impending $80 million merger. The office air was electric with the energy of a tech firm on the verge of acquisition. Any unexpected variable could trigger a panic among the acquiring board members. That was exactly what my family was banking on. My executive assistant, Monica, rushed rapidly into the room with wide, alarmed eyes. She had been with me for exactly 3 years and was usually the epitome of calm professional efficiency. "Sydney, I am so deeply sorry to interrupt." Monica dropped to a panicked whisper. "People in the main lobby are demanding to see you right now. They bypassed visitor registration and are causing a massive scene. An older man screaming that he is your father brought a lawyer. They are threatening to call the news networks if we deny them immediate access." I simply closed my laptop with a quiet click. Narcissists are predictable. Once they realize they cannot breach your personal boundaries, they attack your professional sanctuary, hoping public embarrassment forces you into submission. "Send them up to meeting room B," I instructed smoothly. "Have security escort them. Once they are inside, I want 2 armed guards standing outside the door." Meeting room B was designed for hostile negotiations. It was soundproof, windowless, and equipped with discreet security cameras. It was a sterile, intimidating space meant to remind anyone sitting inside that they were entirely on my territory. I adjusted my blazer, maintaining a steady breathing rhythm as I walked down the corridor. I needed to analyze their exact angle of attack before I destroyed it. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany door, the scene inside was almost comical in its desperation. Thomas, Stephanie, and a slick man in a cheap suit sat around the conference table. Brenda was absent, likely playing the frail victim back at their hotel. Thomas leaned back in his ergonomic chair, projecting the aura of a wealthy investor. Stephanie vibrated in her seat, calculating the value of the custom furniture while looking at me with burning jealousy. "Nice place you have got here," Thomas said, gesturing to the skyline views. "Must cost a fortune to lease this much square footage." Glad to see my investment is paying off so handsomely. I ignored his bait entirely. I walked to the head of the table and took a seat directly across from them, folding my hands neatly. State your business, Thomas. I have a highly profitable company to run, and your presence is currently an unauthorized distraction. The man in the cheap suit cleared his throat and pulled out printed documents. Ms. Williams, my name is Richard Pendleton. I am the legal counsel representing your family. We are here today to formally request a 30% equity stake in this software company, as well as a retroactive cash payout of $20 million directly from your upcoming acquisition merger. I stared at him completely blank. The audacity of the demand was so disconnected from legal reality that I had to suppress a laugh. 30% equity, $20 million. They had marched into a secure corporate facility to execute a shakedown based on nothing but biological relation. 30%, I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. Based on what legal precedent exactly? The fact that we happen to share a blood type. Based on initial seed funding, Richard stated confidently, sliding a piece of paper across the polished table toward me. My client is the primary angel investor of this entire enterprise. I looked down at the piece of paper. It was a faded, poorly photocopied bank statement dating back exactly 30 years. The statement showed a single-line item highlighted in bright yellow marker. It was a transfer of $5,000 from Thomas's checking account to an account belonging to my late Aunt Beverly. When Beverly took you in, she could not afford to raise a child. Thomas lied, his eyes gleaming with malicious greed. I gave her $5,000 to keep a roof over your head. Beverly told me she used that exact money to buy you your first computer, the very computer you used to learn software coding. Therefore, my $5,000 was the initial investment that launched your career. I own a substantial piece of everything you have built, Sydney. I'll build this company using my capital. Stephanie slammed her hands on the table, leaning forward aggressively. You owe us, Sydney. Do you know how hard things have been for us? I have massive credit card debts. Andre is stressing out every single night about paying our mortgage, and you are hoarding millions of dollars. You stole our father's money to build this place, and now it is time for you to pay us back. But focusing on Andre was a problem for later. Right now, I had to deal with the three delusional extortionists in my conference room, waving a 30-year-old bank statement like it was a binding corporate contract. I picked up the flimsy piece of paper, holding it up to the bright light of the conference room. I examined the faded ink and the ridiculous yellow highlighter mark, taking a deliberate breath, and prepared to systematically dismantle the most absurd legal argument I had encountered in my life. I set the paper back down on the mahogany table with a slow, deliberate motion. The silence in the room stretched until the tension became almost suffocating. I looked directly at the man calling himself a legal professional. Mr. Pendleton. I began, my voice cold and entirely stripped of emotion. Let me educate you on corporate law, since you clearly missed that semester. What you have handed me is a 30-year-old bank transfer from my father to my aunt. There is no accompanying promissory note. There is no equity agreement. There is no incorporation document tying this sum to any business entity, primarily because I was 10 years old at the time and completely incapable of signing a legally binding contract. Pendleton shifted uncomfortably in his cheap suit. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off immediately. Furthermore, I continued, leaning forward slightly to hold his gaze. I know exactly what this $5,000 was used for. It was not seed funding for my first computer. It was a desperate loan Thomas begged from Aunt Beverly to cover a massive illicit gambling debt he accumulated after bankrupting his own family. Beverly kept meticulous financial records, which I inherited upon her passing. I have the receipts proving Thomas paid this exact amount back to her 18 months later to avoid having his kneecaps broken by his creditors. Thomas turned a violent shade of crimson. You ungrateful little brat, I am your father. You owe me everything. I owe you absolutely nothing, I stated, shifting my icy gaze to Stephanie, who was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You abandoned me in the freezing snow, legally relinquished custody to Beverly, and completely erased me from your lives. You had zero involvement in the founding, incorporation, funding, or scaling of this software firm. claiming a 30% equity stake based on a repaid gambling loan from 3 decades ago, is not just legally illiterate, it borders on criminal extortion. Stephanie slammed her fist against the table, rattling the glass water pitchers. You are swimming in cash, Sydney. You can afford to give us 20 million. If you do not pay us right now, we are going to make your life a living hell. Andre and I need that money. Dad needs that money. You stole our future by getting lucky in Silicon Valley. Your financial incompetence is not my responsibility, Stephanie, I replied, maintaining my clinical tone. You want millions. Then you need to learn how to code. You need to put in the 100-hour work weeks. You need to risk everything you have on a single idea. Until you do that, you get absolutely nothing from me. Thomas abruptly stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward with a loud crash. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. If you do not sign over the equity today, we will destroy you. We will go straight to the press. We will tell every local newspaper and national tabloid that you are a fraud, that you stole your initial capital from your struggling elderly parents, and that you threw us out on the street. Let us see how your new corporate partners, like a massive public relations nightmare, right before they sign an $80 million merger. They were attempting to use social leverage, a classic narcissistic manipulation tactic. They hoped the threat of public embarrassment would force me to offer a hush-money settlement to protect my corporate reputation. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I did not operate on panic or emotion. I operated on threat assessment and total neutralization. Are you finished? I asked quietly. We will see you in federal court. The fake lawyer blustered hastily, shoving his useless documents back into his worn briefcase and scrambling to stand up. I pressed a small silver button hidden beneath the edge of the conference table. Almost instantly, the heavy double doors swung open. 3 of my private corporate security guards stepped into the room. They were heavily built, professionally trained, and visibly armed. Escort these individuals out of the building immediately, I ordered, without breaking eye contact with Thomas. If they ever set foot on company property again, have them arrested for trespassing. The lead guard stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Thomas's shoulder. Let us go, sir. Thomas violently jerked his arm away, but the guard quickly subdued him, locking his arm in a firm compliance hold. As security began physically marching them toward the door, Thomas lost whatever remained of his composure. His true nature was fully exposed for my staff to see through the glass walls of the conference room. You are a curse! Thomas screamed, his voice echoing down the executive hallway as he dug his heels into the carpet. You have always been a curse. I will ruin you. I will make sure the whole world knows what a monster you are. You will lose everything. Stephanie trailed behind him, shouting obscenities while frantically trying to adjust her designer jacket. The lawyer scurried out ahead of them, clearly terrified of the armed guards. I watched them being dragged out, my heart rate completely steady. They thought they were playing a simple game of family guilt and public shaming. They believed I would crumble under the threat of media exposure. But they had just stepped into a high-stakes corporate battlefield. And in my world, if you identify a hostile threat, you do not just block it. You completely dismantle it so it can never harm you again. I walked back to my desk and immediately picked up my phone to call my lead corporate attorney. They are going to launch a massive smear campaign in the press, I told him the moment he answered. Let them do it. Let them make as much noise as they possibly can. I want them to feel completely overconfident. In the cybersecurity industry, when a hostile entity attacks your network, the worst thing you can do is block their access immediately. If you block them, they will simply retreat, regroup, and find another hidden vulnerability to exploit later. Instead, you create a honeypot. A honeypot is a decoy system perfectly designed to look incredibly valuable and totally vulnerable. You let the attackers inside. You let them think they are winning the war, all while you quietly log their every single move, gathering the indisputable forensic evidence you need to lock them away in a federal prison forever. My family wanted to start a war. They wanted to use the media and the legal system to extort me. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to set a federal trap so perfectly disguised that their own greed would force them to spring it. The upcoming media storm was just the first phase of their inevitable self-destruction, and I was fully prepared to watch them dig their own graves. The smear campaign escalated faster than a viral malware infection, breaching an unsecured network. By Wednesday morning, my executive dashboard was flashing with severe media monitoring alerts. I sat in my home office sipping coffee while watching the real-time data roll in. They had launched a highly coordinated, emotionally manipulative digital assault designed to destroy my public image and terrorize my corporate partners into forcing a settlement. Stephanie fired the first shot. She weaponized her fake tears for the internet, launching a fraudulent crowdfunding campaign titled "Help Save Elderly Parents Evicted by Billionaire Daughter." I clicked the link, analyzing the page with clinical detachment. The description was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and absolute fiction. Stephanie had posted an old, heavily filtered photograph of Thomas and Brenda looking frail and exhausted. Below the image, she spun a devastatingly fake narrative. She claimed that I had drained our family savings to fund my first software startup, promising to take care of my parents forever once I succeeded. The post detailed how I had ruthlessly abandoned them to face imminent foreclosure the moment my company hit an $80 million valuation. She even included a fabricated quote claiming I had looked my weeping mother in the eye and told her that poor people disgusted me. Within 4 hours, the campaign had raised over $6,000 from sympathetic strangers. Stephanie was not just lying to exact revenge. She was actively committing wire fraud by accepting donations under deeply fraudulent pretenses. I took screenshots of every donation, every update, and the digital footprint of the campaign creator. Every single dollar she collected was adding another month to her eventual federal prison sentence. Then came the second strike. Thomas had clearly been busy working the local press. My alert software caught the breaking news notification from a notorious digital tabloid known for destroying tech executives. The headline splashed across social media in massive red letters: Silicon Valley CEO abandons elderly parents to homelessness. I opened the article. Thomas had given an exclusive, heart-wrenching interview. He painted himself as the sacrificial father who had worked his fingers to the bone to buy me my first computer, only to be cast out onto the street when he needed life-saving medical care. He claimed my company was built entirely on his stolen retirement fund. Brenda had provided a supporting quote stating she cried every night wondering why her successful daughter hated the people who gave her everything. They even included a blurry paparazzi-style photo of me looking stern outside my corporate building, perfectly cementing my new role as the cold, ruthless corporate villain. The public backlash was instantaneous and vicious. The article went viral across every major social platform. My personal inbox flooded with hateful messages from strangers calling me a monster, a parasite, and a disgrace to women in business. People demanded my company be boycotted. Social media activists began organizing a protest outside my headquarters. It was a textbook character assassination designed to induce panic and force a rapid financial payout. Most executives would have immediately issued a defensive press release or scrambled to pay the extortion fee to silence the noise. I did neither. I simply cataloged the libelous articles, traced the source IP addresses of the anonymous tipsters directly back to Stephanie's home network, and handed the raw data to my legal team. I needed them to feel invincible. However, the situation was rapidly bleeding into my professional reality. The true danger of their media warfare was not the public hatred. The true danger was the corporate fallout. My company was in the final due diligence phase of an $80 million acquisition by a global tech conglomerate. This acquiring board was notoriously conservative, heavily focused on public relations and ethical governance. They avoided scandal at all costs. 2 days after the tabloid article gained national traction, I found myself in an emergency video conference with the lead acquisitions director of the conglomerate. His name was David, and his expression on the high-definition monitor was grim. "Sydney, we are seeing some highly concerning noise in the press regarding pending litigation and severe familial financial disputes." David said, his tone strictly professional, but carrying an undeniable edge of warning. "We are purchasing a secure, highly reputable cybersecurity firm. We cannot inherit a messy, high-profile public relations disaster right before the final signing. What exactly is the status of this 30% equity claim your family is parading around the media?" I looked directly into the camera lens, projecting absolute stability. It is an entirely baseless, fabricated extortion attempt, David. There is no legal standing, no valid documentation, and no legitimate threat to the capitalization table of this company. I am handling this situation definitively. See that you do, David replied sharply. Our board is watching this situation very closely. If an actual legal injunction is filed against your corporate assets, or if this scandal impacts your client retention, we will be forced to pause the merger indefinitely to protect our own shareholders. The call ended, leaving the heavy weight of their ultimatum hanging in my office. My family was actively jeopardizing the biggest professional achievement of my life out of pure, unadulterated spite. They wanted to burn my empire to the ground if I refused to let them rule it. But the most complex piece on the board was not Thomas or Stephanie. It was Andre, Stephanie's husband. Andre was a senior financial auditor, an incredibly focused man who built his entire career on uncovering fraud and enforcing strict corporate compliance. I knew Stephanie was currently playing the innocent, defenseless victim at home, manipulating Andre with completely fake dramatic tears, feeding him a heavily twisted narrative where I was the corporate villain who swindled his wife's struggling family. I needed Andre to see the absolute truth, but I could not simply call him. As an auditor, he would never believe simple family gossip. He required undeniable hard data. To get him that data, I had to ensure the pressure from the smear campaign reached a boiling point, forcing my family to make a critical, overconfident mistake. But while I was meticulously laying the groundwork for my digital trap, the collateral damage within my own company was escalating faster than I anticipated. The public relations nightmare had triggered a full-blown panic among my board of directors. My company was not a solo venture anymore. Over the years, I had taken on venture capital to scale our operations, meaning I answered to a board of highly influential Silicon Valley investors. These were people who calculated risk down to the fraction of a percent. On Thursday morning, just 4 days after the disastrous front porch encounter, my lead investor Harrison called an emergency board meeting. Walking into the executive boardroom, I could feel the suffocating weight of their anxiety. Harrison sat at the head of the long glass table flanked by 4 other board members. The massive monitor behind them displayed a live feed of our company brand sentiment analytics plunging downward in a steep red line. The viral fundraising campaign Stephanie launched had been picked up by a prominent tech blog. Protesters had actually shown up at our campus entrance that morning, holding cardboard signs calling me a corporate monster. "We have a massive problem," Sydney Harrison stated bluntly, skipping any pleasantries. The acquiring conglomerate just flagged our public relations metrics. Their legal team is demanding a full disclosure regarding this alleged 30% equity claim your father is broadcasting. If this hits federal court, they will invoke the morality clause and terminate the $80 million acquisition. I took my seat at the table, maintaining perfect posture and absolute calm. There is no equity claim, Harrison. It is a fabricated extortion attempt driven by estranged relatives looking for a quick payout. They do not possess a single shred of legally binding documentation. That does not matter to the court of public opinion, interjected Monica, our head of public relations, who had been invited to the meeting. Sydney, the optics are catastrophic. They have painted a narrative of a ruthless billionaire throwing her elderly, destitute parents out onto the street. We are getting slammed on every social platform. Our enterprise clients are calling our account managers, expressing deep concern over our corporate ethics. We are bleeding goodwill by the hour. The tension in the room was palpable. These investors stood to make millions from the impending merger, and they were watching their massive payout evaporate over a family dispute. "We need to settle this immediately," Harrison demanded, leaning forward and resting his hands flat on the table. "Pay them off. Give them $2 or $3 million and make them sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. It is a small price to pay to save an $80 million deal. We cannot afford to stand on principle when the acquisition is mere weeks away. Just write the check, Sydney." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every single investor. They were brilliant financial minds, but they were panicking like amateurs. They wanted to take the easy way out, offering hush money to domestic terrorists just to make the noise stop. "I am not paying them a single cent," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. Harrison scoffed, his face flushing with frustration. This is not about your personal pride. You have a fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. You are putting everything we built at extreme risk over your stubborn refusal to handle a family squabble. It is not pride, Harrison, it is basic cybersecurity protocol. I fired back, my tone sharp and commanding. If a hacker breaches your outer firewall and installs ransomware, you do not pay the ransom. Paying the ransom guarantees they will return because you have just proven that extortion works. My biological family is executing a social engineering attack. If I hand them $3 million today, they will demand $10 million tomorrow. They will hold this company hostage every time we attempt a major financial move. I refuse to negotiate with extortionists. The room fell completely silent. My board members exchanged uneasy glances. They knew my logic was flawless, but their fear of losing the merger was clouding their judgment. So what is your strategy? Monica asked nervously. Because doing nothing is currently destroying our brand value. I am not doing nothing, I explained clinically. I am gathering forensic data. My family is highly motivated by greed, which makes them reckless. They are currently escalating their tactics because they think I am ignoring them. In their desperation to force a settlement before the merger, they will inevitably cross a hard legal boundary. They will attempt to legitimize their fake equity claim by producing forged documents. When they do, they will move from simple public defamation to federal financial fraud. Harrison stared at me, his eyes narrowing as he processed the magnitude of my strategy. You are baiting them into committing a federal felony. I am allowing them to dig their own graves, I corrected. I just need you all to hold the line for 72 more hours. Do not issue any public statements. Do not respond to the media inquiries. Let them scream into the void. I am setting up a digital infrastructure that will capture their illegal activities in real time. Once I have the irrefutable proof, I will hand it over to the federal authorities and the acquiring board. The scandal will instantly transform from a story about a greedy CEO into a story about a brilliant founder stopping a major corporate extortion ring. The board members murmured among themselves. It was a massive gamble. If my family did not take the bait, or if the acquiring conglomerate pulled out early, we would lose everything. But I had spent the last 5 years proving my tactical brilliance to these people. I had taken their initial capital and turned it into an $80 million enterprise through calculated, fearless execution. You have exactly 72 hours, Sidney Harrison said, finally, his voice heavy with reluctant agreement. If this situation is not completely neutralized by Monday morning, the board will convene to officially vote on your removal as chief executive officer. We will force a settlement ourselves to save the merger. I stood up, buttoning my blazer. You will not need to vote, Harrison. By Monday morning, the people threatening this company will be in handcuffs. I walked out of the boardroom with absolute confidence, though the clock was now ticking furiously. My board was holding off the corporate panic, but my timeline had just been severely compressed. The pressure was immense. I needed to act decisively. I needed to plant the final piece of the puzzle that would guarantee their downfall. The trap was fully constructed, but I had to make sure the right person looked at the data. It was time to arrange a highly strategic, seemingly accidental encounter with the one man who had the power to dismantle their entire operation from the inside. It was time to push Stephanie's husband Andre into investigating his own wife. Andre lived his entire life by the numbers. At 32, he had earned a formidable reputation as a senior financial auditor at a prestigious accounting firm. He was an African-American man who climbed the corporate ladder through sheer intellectual rigor and a strict moral compass. In his world, spreadsheets did not lie and numbers told the absolute truth. I respected that fundamental trait about him. He was meticulous, observant, and intolerant of fraud, which made his marriage to my sister a fascinating psychological paradox. Stephanie had spent 3 years expertly mirroring his values to keep him blind to her true nature. She played the role of the sweet, supportive, morally upright wife to absolute perfection. But the intense strain of maintaining that facade was cracking under the weight of her own greed. Andre was returning home late that evening from a grueling audit cycle, exhausted and craving the quiet sanctuary of his suburban house. Instead, he walked directly into a frantic war room. According to the digital footprint I later uncovered, and the events Andre pieced together that Thursday evening was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. Stephanie met him at the front door with red-rimmed eyes, a blotchy face, and violently trembling hands. She had spent the afternoon practicing her performance in front of a mirror. She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing uncontrollably. Andre, possessing a protective instinct, dropped his briefcase and held her tightly, demanding to know what catastrophic event had occurred. She led him to the living room couch where she had strategically scattered printouts of the vicious tabloid articles and the fraudulent crowdfunding campaign. Through perfectly timed hiccups and manufactured tears, Stephanie fed him the poison drop by drop. She told him her arrogant sister was trying to destroy their elderly parents out of pure spite. She spun a devastating narrative about how Thomas sacrificed his life savings to fund my first software venture when I was just a struggling student. She claimed I signed a binding equity contract, promising to take care of the family financially, only to ruthlessly cut them out and leave them facing absolute ruin the moment the $80 million merger was announced. Andre sat still and listened, his strong sense of professional justice triggered by the horrible story. He abhorred corrupt executives who exploited vulnerable people for personal gain. But he was also a highly trained auditor. His analytical mind automatically sought tangible evidence to support the emotional claims. He asked gently where the original equity contracts were located and why they had not simply filed a standard breach of contract lawsuit. Stephanie tightened her grip on his hand, amplifying her fake tears to a distressed wail. She lied effortlessly without remorse. She claimed I used my elite cybersecurity skills to illegally hack their home network and wipe their family computers clean. She told him I maliciously deleted all digital records of the initial seed funding to cover my tracks. She painted a vivid picture of a cold, calculating tech villain bullying a helpless elderly couple into homelessness. It was a deeply compelling story, tailored to manipulate a man whose career was dedicated to investigating corporate corruption. Andre felt a massive surge of righteous anger on behalf of his weeping wife and distressed in-laws. He asked her directly what he could do to help stop this injustice. This was the exact moment Stephanie tightened the snare around his neck. She told him they hired a brilliant lawyer who managed to discover a tiny fragment of evidence I had supposedly missed during my digital purge. She handed Andre the faded 30-year-old bank statement showing the $5,000 transfer. She framed it as undeniable concrete proof of the initial angel investment that launched my empire. Then she looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. She told him her parents were completely out of their depth fighting a powerful tech executive. She begged Andre to use his advanced financial auditing skills to carefully review the documents they were secretly gathering. She said she needed his professional expertise to help build an airtight case against me before the corporate merger finalized. She needed him to step up and be their absolute hero. Andre stared at the highlighted bank statement. His professional instincts, honed by years of uncovering hidden corporate assets and tracing complex financial irregularities, began to churn. He promised his weeping wife he would certainly help secure true justice and analyze every single piece of important data they could possibly find. He had no idea that by agreeing to investigate my company, he was stepping directly onto the digital battlefield I had meticulously prepared. Stephanie thought she was incredibly clever. She genuinely believed she successfully weaponized her husband's brilliant analytical mind against me. She assumed Andre would blindly accept her fabricated narrative and use his corporate authority to legitimize their sloppy extortion attempt. What she entirely failed to understand was the fundamental nature of a true auditor. Andre did not just look at the evidence presented to him, he looked closely for the anomalies. He actively searched for the hidden discrepancies in the data trail. By inviting him to look into the financial records, Stephanie had unknowingly invited the ultimate lie detector into the center of her own fraudulent scheme. The trap was perfectly set, but I needed to ensure Andre looked in the exact right direction. I needed to break through the fog of emotional manipulation and appeal directly to his cold, hard logic. I needed to give him a compelling reason to doubt the words of the woman sleeping next to him. The perfect opportunity to deliver that critical piece of information was already approaching. I confirmed their dinner reservation for the upcoming holiday weekend. It was time to orchestrate a very public collision. I was going to use their own social climbing habits against them and drop a digital breadcrumb that a man like Andre would find impossible to ignore. Through a mutual contact in the tech industry, I easily uncovered my parents' holiday plans. Thomas always preferred to project immense wealth rather than actually possess it. For Thanksgiving weekend, he had booked a highly visible corner booth at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in the city. It was the kind of establishment where reservations required a substantial deposit and the waitstaff wore tailored suits. I immediately instructed my assistant to secure a table for me and my chief legal counsel at the exact same time. The ambiance inside the restaurant was meticulously curated, filled with dark polished oak crystal chandeliers and the hushed conversations of Silicon Valley elite. I walked through the double doors wearing a sharp navy blue suit projecting the absolute authority of a woman who owned her space. My attorney walked quietly beside me. I spotted them instantly. Thomas, Brenda, Stephanie, and Andre were seated at a prominent table near the center of the dining room. Thomas was already gesturing wildly to a waiter, loudly complaining about the vintage of the wine he had just tasted. Brenda sat next to him, adjusting her expensive-looking jewelry and scanning the room to see who might be watching them. Stephanie was sipping champagne, laughing at something Thomas said. Next to her sat Andre. He looked impeccable in a tailored suit, but carried an undeniable exhaustion in his posture. He looked like a man carrying the heavy burden of someone else's fabricated crisis. I adjusted my trajectory slightly, walking directly past their table on the way to my own. I made sure to lock eyes with Andre the moment he looked up. "Sydney," Andre said, standing up out of pure professional politeness. He looked deeply conflicted. He was a genuinely good man, caught in a massive web of toxic lies, trying to reconcile the ruthless corporate villain, his wife described with the calm professional woman standing right in front of him. Stephanie dropped her champagne glass onto the table with a loud clatter. Her face instantly contorted into an ugly, hateful sneer. "What are you doing here? Are you stalking us now?" Thomas slammed his heavy hand flat against the crisp white tablecloth loud enough to draw immediate stares from the adjacent diners. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face in public, Sydney. You are nothing but a thief. You would be absolutely nothing without my seed money. You stole from your own family." The surrounding tables fell completely silent. Waiters paused mid-step. Thomas was purposely creating a public spectacle, weaponizing his volume to intimidate me. I ignored him entirely. My eyes remained locked exclusively on Andre. I could see the rapid analytical gears turning in his head. He was watching my absolute calm in the face of their erratic public hostility. He was observing how a supposedly guilty person was not flinching, not raising her voice, and not acting defensive. "I am not here for them, Andre," I said, my voice quiet, clinical, and completely devoid of emotional reaction. "I know Stephanie has told you a very compelling story about stolen funds and deleted digital records. I know she has cast herself as the helpless victim and me as the ruthless criminal. But you are a senior financial auditor. Your entire highly respected profession is based on verifying the chain of custody and examining raw data. You do not survive in your industry by trusting tearful narratives. You survive by demanding empirical proof." Andre frowned, his rigid posture stiffening as his professional instincts flared. "What exactly are you saying, Sydney?" "I am saying," I replied, stepping slightly closer to the table, so only he could clearly hear my exact words, that a good auditor never simply trusts the story presented to them. They always check the source files. They verify the digital trail. You might want to take a very close look at your wife's personal laptop. Look deeply at her deleted files. Look at the IP routing logs. Verify the raw data yourself, Andre. Check the timestamps on the evidence they claim to possess. Do all of this before you blindly tie your impeccable professional reputation to a massive federal fraud. "Do not listen to her, Andre," Stephanie shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, desperate octave. "She is trying to gaslight you. She is completely crazy. She hacked our computers and destroyed the evidence. She is a liar." Andre looked down at his wife, who was now clutching his arm with white knuckles. Then he looked back at me. The seed of professional doubt was firmly planted. As an auditor, he knew that innocent people did not panic when told to verify their data. Only guilty people panicked. Stephanie's immediate hysterical reaction to my suggestion of a simple digital audit was the exact trigger he needed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently on the edge of their table to cover the expensive champagne they were drinking. "The math never lies, Andre," I said softly. "But your wife does." I turned and walked away toward my own table, my attorney falling into step beside me. I left a deafening heavy silence in my wake. Thomas was sputtering silently. Brenda was clutching her napkin, and Stephanie was desperately whispering into Andre's ear. But Andre was no longer looking at her. He was staring directly at the $100 bill on the table, his analytical mind visibly reconstructing the entire timeline of events. I had engaged his professional curiosity and his unyielding moral compass. Andre was not the kind of man to let a direct accusation of federal fraud go uninvestigated, especially when his own career could be caught in the blast radius. Now it was time to finally spring the actual trap. The digital honeypot server was fully operational and waiting. I just needed them greedy and desperate enough to take the bait. I sat down and waited. The waiting did not take long at all. Greed is a highly predictable catalyst. When people believe they are on the verge of losing a massive unearned payday, they accelerate their timeline and abandon all caution. That weekend, while I maintained absolute silence, my family made their fatal move. They escalated their attack from public defamation to a direct legal strike against my company. Monday morning arrived with the harsh buzzing of my secure corporate cell phone. I was already at my desk reviewing the final compliance checklist for the merger. The caller ID showed Marshall, my lead corporate litigator. Marshall was a veteran of Silicon Valley legal warfare, a man who rarely raised his voice, but his tone today was sharp and heavily laced with urgency. "Sydney, we have a catastrophic development," Marshall stated the moment I answered the call. "Your father and your sister just bypassed standard civil litigation entirely. They filed a petition for a federal injunction in the United States District Court this morning. They are seeking to instantly freeze all of your corporate assets and place an immediate hard halt on the $80 million merger. They are citing undisclosed equity disputes and massive corporate fraud." I kept my eyes locked on my monitor, my breathing steady and rhythmic. "Let them file whatever they want, Marshall. Anyone can file a lawsuit. It means absolutely nothing without legally binding documentation." "That is exactly the problem," Marshall replied, typing rapidly on his end of the line. They attached newly submitted documentation to the federal filing. They submitted a drafted equity contract dated exactly 7 years ago. It bears your signature. The document explicitly acknowledges Thomas as an official angel investor and contractually entitles him to 30% of all future corporate acquisitions or buyout events. My hands stopped hovering over my keyboard. I instructed Marshall to send the digital file to my encrypted inbox immediately. Within seconds, a high-resolution scan of their supposed legal weapon appeared on my screen. I opened the PDF file and examined the document with the clinical precision of a forensic expert analyzing a malicious malware code. The contract was a blatant, spectacularly sloppy forgery. It was a digital Frankenstein monster. I could immediately see the pixelation artifacts around the edges of the text where a cheap editing software had been used. They had taken a digital signature of mine from an old publicly available tax filing, hired a black market graphic designer likely off the dark web, and clumsily spliced it onto a fabricated Word document. The typography did not even match standard legal formatting from 7 years ago. The margins were misaligned. The legal jargon was an absolute mess of buzzwords that no real corporate attorney would ever draft. But the most amusing part was the addendum. To bolster their fake contract, they had attached several printed emails. These were the exact decoy emails I had personally drafted and placed on my honeypot server. The emails contained highly suggestive fabricated conversations between myself and my late Aunt Beverly, discussing how to hide Thomas's initial $5,000 investment from the official capitalization table. "They took the bait," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "They hacked the decoy server this weekend. They downloaded the fake files and actually submitted them to a federal judge as genuine evidence. Marshall did not share my amusement. Sydney, you need to understand the absolute gravity of this situation. The acquiring conglomerate has already flagged the federal court filing. Their legal team is currently hyperventilating. We are dealing with an incredibly conservative board of directors. If a federal judge grants this temporary injunction, your assets will be completely locked down. The merger will be paused indefinitely. The acquiring company will likely pull out entirely by the end of the week to avoid inheriting a federal legal scandal. This fake document could destroy the entire $80 million deal. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair processing the variables. My family thought they had orchestrated the perfect corporate heist. They believed they had found the ultimate silver bullet to force a massive settlement. They assumed the sheer terror of losing an $80 million acquisition would make me write them a $20 million check just to make the lawsuit disappear. Marshall listened to me very carefully. I instructed, my voice dropping to a hard, commanding register. Do you realize what they have just done by filing this specific document in a federal court? Yes, Marshall sighed heavily. Filing a forged document in a federal court to halt a corporate merger is wire fraud, perjury, and federal extortion. This is no longer a civil family dispute over a loan. This is a severe federal crime. They have committed a felony. Exactly, I confirmed. They just handed us the rope to hang them with. So here is the strategy. We do not contest the injunction aggressively today. We do not tip our hand. We file a standard delay motion to buy us exactly 48 hours. Marshall paused, his legal instincts fighting my corporate strategy. Sydney, if we do not crush this injunction immediately, the acquiring board will walk away. We have to present the forgery evidence to the judge right now. No, I commanded. If we strike now, Thomas and Stephanie will claim they were duped by a third party. They will play the victims and slip away. I want them to walk into our boardroom on the day of the merger signing thinking they have a loaded gun pointed at my head. I want them to bring that fake contract into a room full of corporate executives and legally present it as truth. We are going to let them pull the trigger. Once they present that document, there will be no plausible deniability. The trap is locked. It is now over. I disconnected the call and stared at the server logs on my screen. The digital net was tightening around them now. Building the trap required incredibly meticulous preparation following their disastrous ambush at our headquarters. I needed them to find the exact evidence they wanted without making it look easy. Handing them a fake contract directly would raise suspicion. They needed to feel they outsmarted me. They needed the thrill of the heist. I resurrected a legacy server from the earliest days of my company. It ran an outdated operating system, a digital dinosaur a careless founder might forget. I intentionally isolated this server from my primary corporate network, placing it carefully in a secure virtual sandbox before crafting the bait. Creating the fabricated emails took hours. I perfectly mimicked the gentle, formal writing style of Aunt Beverly. I generated dozens of mundane fake emails about groceries and doctor appointments to bury the key documents, making the archive look like a genuine, untouched backup. Hidden within a folder labeled Personal Legal Drafts, I planted the golden tickets. I wrote email exchanges between myself and a fictitious early advisor explicitly discussing Thomas and his $5,000 contribution. I used phrases designed to trigger my father's massive ego, suggesting I was terrified Thomas would realize how much his initial seed money was actually worth. The absolute crowning jewel was the fake equity contract template. I left a digital breadcrumb trail indicating this document was a highly classified secret I desperately wanted kept off the official capitalization table. Stephanie would instantly assume I was hiding illegal actions. Narcissists always project their lack of morality onto everyone else. She believed I was a fraud because she was a fraud. The next challenge was guiding them to the honeypot without explicitly handing them the map. This required careful social engineering. Following their demand for 30% equity, I had my legal team draft a highly aggressive cease and desist letter. We sent this letter directly to their rented attorney, Arthur Pendleton. The letter was a standard legal threat warning them to back off. However, hidden deep within the technical addendum of the digital document, I embedded a specific string of metadata. It was a routing pathway pointing directly to the IP address of my decoy server. I knew Pendleton was too incompetent to notice it, but I knew Stephanie. She was deeply entwined in the darker corners of the internet, searching for cheap graphic designers to forge documents. I gambled she would hand that document over to whatever black market freelancer she hired, asking them to scan it for vulnerabilities. Any amateur hacker would immediately spot the hidden IP address and assume they had discovered a massive unpatched backdoor into my personal archives. The true beauty of the honeypot was its silent aggression. The server was not passively holding fake documents. It was heavily armed with tracking payloads. The second an unauthorized user breached the outer firewall, the server initiated a silent lockdown procedure. It did not block the intruder. Instead, it welcomed them in granting full access to the fake directories. Simultaneously, the server deployed a micro-tracking script directly into the intruder's browser. This script was entirely invisible to the end user, transmitting a continuous stream of forensic data back to my highly secure main terminal. It bypassed their cheap commercial private networks. It logged their exact geographical location. It captured their unique device fingerprint, documenting the specific make and model of the laptop they were using. It recorded their keystroke dynamics and monitored every single file they opened, previewed, and downloaded. I sat alone in my home office all weekend, watching the digital trap spring shut. The initial breach occurred late Saturday night. Flashing red alerts on my monitors confirmed. The intruder was rapidly downloading the entire folder of fabricated emails and the fake equity contract. They were pulling the poison directly into their local hard drive. They thought they had successfully executed a brilliant corporate espionage maneuver. They thought they had secured the weapon that would force me to hand over $20 million. As I carefully analyzed the incoming forensic data packets, a sudden cold realization settled over me. The IP address the attackers used was not routed through a foreign proxy server. The raw data showed the breach originating from a residential internet service provider located right here in the United States. Specifically, the connection came from an upscale suburban neighborhood. It came directly from the home network registered to Andre. Stephanie had not just hired a freelancer to do her dirty work. She actively downloaded the forged federal documents and the stolen decoy files onto her personal laptop while sitting in the living room she shared with her husband. She routed a massive federal felony directly through the connection of a senior financial auditor. She linked Andre to an illegal extortion plot. My sister weaponized his network to commit a crime that could destroy his career and land him in prison. She was completely willing to burn him down just to get to me. Her sociopathic actions solidified my resolve. I was not just protecting my $80 million merger anymore. I was demolishing a toxic threat. The evidence was secured. The federal trap was locked. Now I just needed Andre to wake up and look closely at his network logs. It was late Friday evening when the secondary monitor in my home office flared to life with a fresh cascade of critical alerts. The initial ping had occurred days ago, but now they were returning for the main event. My family had taken the technical addendum from the cease and desist letter, isolated the decoy IP string, and fed it into whatever cheap decryption tool Stephanie had managed to purchase online. I sat back in my leather chair, taking a slow sip of my coffee, and watched the live telemetry data scrolling across my screen in bright green text. It is a terrifyingly intimate experience to watch someone attempt to break into a system you personally designed. You see their hesitation, their clumsy digital footsteps, and their blinding, foolish arrogance. The intruder was utilizing a generic, easily traceable virtual private network. It was a pathetic amateur attempt to mask their geographic location. My honeypot server was specifically engineered to bypass commercial security shields instantly. As they navigated the fake directory, my tracking software intercepted their keyboard inputs in real time. I watched the text appear line by line on my monitor. Stephanie was typing. She searched for the word equity. Then she searched for the name Thomas. Finally, she searched for Beverly. She was hunting for the exact fabricated narrative she needed to legitimize her extortion attempt. I could almost picture the scene unfolding in her pristine suburban living room. Thomas was undoubtedly standing right over her shoulder, his face flushed with greedy anticipation, coaching her to grab every single document she could find. The server logs indicated she had successfully located the decoy folder, clearly labeled confidential legal drafts. My pulse remained completely steady. I did not move to block the connection. I simply watched as she initiated a massive bulk download. 300 fabricated emails and the masterfully forged equity contract template began flowing through the fiber optic cables, transferring straight into the local hard drive of her personal laptop. They thought they were uncovering a massive corporate conspiracy. They thought they had just secured the ultimate legal weapon to bring my $80 million merger to a grinding, catastrophic halt. They believed they were absolute geniuses executing a flawless digital heist. What Thomas and Stephanie did not realize was the staggering volume of forensic data they were handing me in return. My tracking script was ruthlessly efficient and completely silent. It captured the exact media access control address of Stephanie's laptop, a unique hardware identifier that proved definitively which physical machine was committing the crime. It logged the active user profile, which was registered directly to her name. It captured the specific screen resolution, the operating system build, and the exact timestamps of every single click. I was building a pristine, unbreakable chain of digital evidence. Downloading unauthorized proprietary files from a corporate server is a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. By extracting those specific files with the explicit intent to use them for financial extortion, they were actively committing federal wire fraud. Every single kilobyte of data they transferred was another heavy nail driven into their legal coffin. But the most crucial piece of data scrolling across my screen was the network gateway. Despite her clumsy attempts at using a proxy server, the root connection traced directly back to the primary wireless router in her home. The account for that specific internet service provider was legally registered to her husband. Andre was a senior financial auditor. His entire prestigious career, his livelihood, and his freedom depended on absolute financial and digital integrity. Stephanie was recklessly using his personal network, attaching his legal liability to a plot to commit a federal felony against his sister-in-law. She was completely willing to burn her own husband to the ground if it meant getting her hands on my money. Her sociopathic greed solidified my resolve. I was no longer just protecting my $80 million corporate merger. I was demolishing a severe toxic threat that had plagued my entire existence. I watched the download progress bar on my monitor finally reach 100%. The connection severed abruptly as Stephanie closed her browser, likely believing she had executed a masterclass in corporate espionage. She probably poured Thomas a glass of expensive champagne to celebrate their victory. They were undoubtedly popping corks right now, entirely convinced they were about to become multimillionaires. I systematically saved the raw forensic packet, heavily encrypted it, and backed the data up to 3 separate secure physical drives. This was the absolute smoking gun. If I handed this file directly to the federal authorities tonight, Thomas and Stephanie would be arrested and placed in holding cells before sunrise. But I needed the corporate threat fully and publicly neutralized. I needed the acquiring board of directors to witness my absolute control over this hostile situation. More importantly, I needed Andre to discover the betrayal himself. If I simply called him and handed over the files, I was just the vindictive sister-in-law trying to ruin a marriage. If he found the evidence hidden on his own home network, he was a trained auditor, uncovering a massive domestic fraud scheme. I needed to guide him to the truth without leaving my fingerprints on the revelation. Before closing the server connection, I executed one final command. I left a deliberate digital trace on their home router. It was a tiny, seemingly harmless anomaly in their network traffic logs. It was the kind of minor data irregularity a standard internet user would never notice in a million years. But a senior financial auditor, a man highly trained to hunt for hidden discrepancies in complex ledgers, would spot it immediately. I knew Andre routinely checked his home network security because diligent auditors always secure their own personal environments. The digital breadcrumb was perfectly placed. All I had to do now was wait for the auditor to open his laptop and look at the brutal, undeniable truth. Andre arrived at his suburban home just past midnight on Saturday. The house was completely dark and quiet. Stephanie had gone to bed hours earlier, exhausted from celebrating her perceived digital heist. Andre placed his heavy briefcase on the kitchen island and loosened his tie. His mind replayed the bizarre encounter at the steakhouse. My clinical demeanor and the specific financial terminology I used had deeply unsettled him. I had spoken to him not as an angry, estranged relative, but as a fellow corporate professional highlighting a compliance failure. As a senior financial auditor, Andre spent his days hunting for hidden liabilities and uncovering corporate deception. His entire worldview was structured around the absolute certainty of verifiable data. He poured himself a glass of cold water and walked into his home office to check his messages. He opened his laptop and connected to his wireless network. Andre was a meticulous man who configured his own security protocols. He regularly monitored his traffic logs to ensure his proprietary client data remained secure. Tonight he opened his network administration dashboard out of pure habit. Almost instantly, his trained eye caught the anomaly. It was a massive spike in outbound data requests occurring precisely 3 hours earlier, followed by a heavy inbound packet transfer from an unrecognized external IP address. The data volume was substantial, routed through a cheap commercial proxy server. Andre sat forward, his exhaustion vanishing, replaced by sharp professional focus. He traced the internal routing of the data packet. It had not been downloaded to his secure work terminal. The destination address belonged to his wife's personal laptop. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Stephanie was not a technical person. She barely knew how to operate basic spreadsheet software. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for her laptop to be pulling massive encrypted data packets through a masked proxy server late on a Saturday night. My words from the restaurant echoed clearly in his mind. A good auditor never simply trusts the story presented to them. They verify the digital trail. Andre stood up and walked silently down the hallway to their master bedroom. Stephanie was breathing deeply, fast asleep. Her silver laptop was sitting on her vanity table, plugged into the charger. Andre quietly unplugged the machine, picked it up, and carried it back to his home office, shutting the door firmly behind him. He opened the laptop. Stephanie had protected her user profile with a basic 4-digit PIN. Andre tried her birth year. It unlocked immediately. People who construct elaborate lies are often stunningly lazy about their basic security. He navigated directly to her downloads folder. He expected to find online shopping receipts or the family documents she claimed to be organizing. Instead, he found a massive compressed file archive. He slowly extracted the folder and began reading. The screen filled with hundreds of fabricated emails between myself and Aunt Beverly. He read the highly suggestive language discussing hidden seed money and secret capitalization tables. To an untrained eye, it certainly looked like a massive corporate conspiracy. But Andre carefully checked the file metadata. He checked the origin server certificates. He recognized immediately that all these files were unverified, pulled from an unsecured external sandbox test environment. But that was not the discovery that shattered his marriage. As Andre continued to audit her hard drive, his forensic instincts took over. He opened her internet browser history and examined the cached data. He found extensive searches regarding how to extract digital signatures from public tax filings. He found searches for dark web graphic design services. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He navigated to her encrypted messaging applications. Stephanie had installed Telegram, believing the application automatically erased all digital footprints. She was wrong. The local cache retained the text logs. Andre opened the most recent conversation thread. It was a negotiation with an anonymous user based in Eastern Europe. Andre read the messages, feeling physically sick. He read his wife haggling over the price of a forged digital signature. He saw the exact public document where they had scraped my signature. He read Thomas providing the specific legal terminology he wanted included in the fake contract. Then he opened the final attachment in the chat log. It was a perfectly rendered high-resolution PDF of an equity contract backdated 7 years, complete with my forged signature and Thomas's name listed as a primary angel investor. Andre stared at the screen, his mind processing the sheer magnitude of the criminality. Stephanie had not just lied about a family dispute. She actively hired a foreign digital mercenary to forge a binding legal contract against a multi-million-dollar corporation. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with devastating force. His name was on the lease of this house. His name was on the internet service provider account that transmitted the forged documents. His wife had utilized his personal network to execute a massive extortion plot against an executive currently finalizing an $80 million corporate merger. If federal investigators traced the IP address, they would raid this house. They would seize his professional work terminals. His firm would fire him immediately. He would lose his licenses, his career, and potentially his freedom, all because he married a woman who viewed him as a convenient shield for her sociopathic greed. Andre closed his eyes in the dark room. The woman sleeping down the hall was a complete stranger. She weaponized his empathy to secure blind support while actively committing a federal felony. He did not scream or demand an explanation. The raw data provided the absolute truth. He gathered the copied forensic drives, packed a single small suitcase, left his gold wedding ring on the kitchen island, and quietly walked out the front door forever, knowing he had 24 hours to deliver the evidence, according to the detailed timeline Andre later provided during the federal investigation. His drive away from that suburban house was the defining moment of his entire life. The cold engine of his sedan roared to life in the quiet driveway, breaking the heavy silence of the early Sunday morning. Andre navigated the deserted streets long before dawn, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. How was a man who had built his entire identity on absolute integrity and unyielding ethical standards. As a black man navigating the elite high-stakes world of corporate financial auditing, he had spent his life ensuring his professional record was completely flawless. He operated with zero margin for error, working twice as hard to secure his respected position. Now, the woman he had promised to spend his life with had weaponized his home network to launch a federal extortion plot against a major software corporation. He checked into an anonymous business hotel downtown, paying in cash to avoid alerting Stephanie to his location. In the sterile hotel room, he placed the 3 encrypted flash drives on the cheap laminate desk. They sat there like radioactive material containing the digital poison that had just killed his marriage. Andre stared at those small metal drives for hours as the sun slowly rose over the city skyline. The moral dilemma tearing him apart was agonizing but deeply analytical. He realized Stephanie had never actually loved him. The painful truth washed over him in crushing waves. She had profiled him. She needed a man with a respectable income, an impeccable credit score, and an unquestionable moral standing to serve as a respectable shield for her parasitic lifestyle. Every time she kissed him, every time she played the sweet and supportive wife, it was a highly calculated performance. She had used his love and his natural protective instincts to turn him into a pawn for Thomas and Brenda. He remembered how she had wept on the couch, begging him to use his auditing skills to protect her poor elderly parents from my supposed corporate cruelty. It was all a masterful manipulation designed to blind him to her criminality. Andre mentally mapped out the catastrophic legal exposure he currently faced: wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit extortion against a federally regulated entity. If the FBI traced the IP logs back to his home router before he stepped forward, he would instantly become a prime suspect. His firm would fire him immediately. He would be disbarred, and his hard-earned CPA license would be permanently revoked. He would face federal indictment, massive legal fees, and potential prison time. He had to choose between protecting a wife who viewed him as collateral damage or protecting the law. He thought about confronting her, about driving back to the house and demanding an explanation. But an experienced auditor knows that confronting a fraudster without neutralizing their power only leads to destroyed evidence and hysterical gaslighting. If he woke Stephanie up, she would scream, cry, deny everything, and likely attempt to smash the laptop. She would call Thomas, and together they would spin a new web of lies to frame Andre as the aggressor. So he remained in the shadows. He secured the raw data. He isolated the variables. For an auditor, the truth is not negotiable. He realized that silence is complicity. If he deleted the files and went back home to pretend everything was normal, he would be an active, knowing participant in a federal felony. He thought about my calm demeanor at the steakhouse. I had not yelled. I had not panicked or caused a theatrical scene. I had simply handed him the key to the truth, trusting his professional integrity to unlock the door. I had treated him with the respect his own wife denied him. Andre chose absolute justice. He spent his Sunday afternoon executing strategic, irreversible moves. He contacted a high-powered divorce attorney, leaving a highly detailed voicemail outlining an emergency filing for Monday morning. He severed his financial ties, rapidly transferring his personal funds into a newly established secure solo account. He gathered all the documentation regarding the lease on their home, preparing to formally remove his liability. I was amputating the toxic infection from his life with surgical precision. He refused to let the greed of a narcissistic family pull him down into the dirt. Sunday evening arrived. The deadline was rapidly approaching. My massive corporate merger was scheduled for signature at 10 in the morning on Monday. The sun was setting over my Silicon Valley estate when my secure corporate cell phone finally rang. I was sitting quietly at my desk running a final diagnostic scan on the honeypot server logs to ensure every packet of data was pristine for the authorities. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I answered immediately, keeping my breathing even. Sydney, the deep, exhausted voice said over the line. "It is Andre. Hello, Andre. Did you check the source files?" "I checked everything," he replied. His voice was heavy with a profound mixture of grief and absolute resolute clarity. "You were right about all of it. They forged the equity contract. They actively hacked your old server. They hired a dark web graphic designer. They are planning to ambush your corporate signing tomorrow morning with the fake federal injunction to force a massive $20 million financial settlement." "I am fully aware," I said calmly, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "The question is, Andre, what are you going to do about it?" "I am an officer of the court and a certified senior financial auditor," he stated firmly, the authority returning to his tone. "I do not harbor corporate fraudsters. What time is your meeting tomorrow?" 10 in the morning. "Sharp." "I will be there," he promised, and disconnected the call. I set my phone down on the desk, a deep sense of respect washing over me. Andre had faced the ultimate moral test and passed with flying colors. My family had vastly underestimated him, just as they had always underestimated me. They viewed good, hardworking people as disposable objects to be exploited for personal gain. But the trap was now completely primed. The digital evidence was secured, and the inside witness was ready to testify. The pieces were locked into their final, devastating positions. Thomas, Brenda, and Stephanie truly believed they had orchestrated the perfect corporate heist. They thought they held all the winning cards and were gleefully walking into a boardroom to collect their unearned millions. They had absolutely no idea they were marching blindly into a federal slaughterhouse. Monday morning arrived with the crisp electric tension of a looming storm. The boardroom on the top floor of my corporate headquarters was a masterpiece of intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of the Silicon Valley skyline, while the center of the room was dominated by a heavy dark mahogany table surrounded by plush leather ergonomic chairs that felt more like modern thrones. I sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. My posture was relaxed, my breathing steady, masking the intense tactical operation playing out in my mind. Flanking me were my top corporate attorneys, including Marshall, who looked uncharacteristically tense. He kept glancing at the heavy glass doors, knowing the explosive confrontation that was about to occur. Sitting directly across from us was the executive acquisition team from the global tech conglomerate. They were led by David, the acquisitions director I had spoken to days prior. He was accompanied by a small army of severe-looking corporate lawyers and strict compliance officers. These were people who dealt in billion-dollar valuations and zero-tolerance risk policies. They demanded perfection, and they were currently on high alert due to the vicious smear campaign my family had orchestrated over the weekend. In the exact center of the polished mahogany table sat the official merger agreement. It was a thick, legally binding stack of heavily vetted documents that represented 5 years of my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. It represented an $80 million transfer of power and wealth. It required only a single signature from my pen to execute the entire transaction. David leaned forward, adjusting his expensive tie. Sydney, before we proceed with the formal signing, I need absolute assurance that the public relations issue we discussed has been fully neutralized. Our board is extremely sensitive to any pending litigation. We saw the tabloid articles. We monitored the social media backlash. We cannot afford any sudden legal injunctions freezing these assets the moment we transfer the capital. I met David's gaze with unwavering confidence. You have my absolute assurance, David. The individuals causing the media disturbance have zero legal standing. They possess no valid equity in this company. The situation is completely under control, and any attempt they make to disrupt this acquisition will be handled swiftly and legally. David nodded slowly, signaling his lead counsel to slide the final signature pages toward the center of the table. The heavy silence in the room was punctuated only by the soft hum of the climate control system and the faint rustle of legal paper. The digital clock on the wall displayed 9:55. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung violently open. My family did not just walk into the room, they strutted. Thomas marched at the front of the pack, his chest puffed out, carrying himself with the arrogant swagger of a conquering king. He was wearing a suit that was a decade out of style, trying desperately to look like a high-powered investor. Next to him was Stephanie, wearing a flashy designer outfit she had undoubtedly purchased on massive credit in eager anticipation of her unearned payout. She wore a look of triumphant, venomous glee, her eyes scanning the room and taking in the wealth she firmly believed she was about to steal. Trailing slightly behind them was Brenda, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, already slipping into her highly rehearsed role of the frail, abused mother. Rounding out the group was Arthur Pendleton, the rented lawyer from the local strip mall, looking entirely out of his depth as he took in the phalanx of elite corporate attorneys staring back at him. The executives from the conglomerate immediately stiffened. David stood up, his face hardening into a mask of pure corporate outrage. Security, one of his lawyers barked, reaching for the phone in the center of the table. Who authorized these people to enter this secure floor? No, let them speak, I said, raising a single hand to halt the lawyer. My voice was eerily calm, cutting through the sudden chaos like a scalpel. Let them put their claims on the official legal record right here in front of everyone. Thomas sneered, marching directly up to the mahogany table. He slapped a thick manila folder down onto the polished wood with a loud, aggressive thud. Stop the signing immediately. This company is officially under a federal injunction. You cannot acquire these assets because I own 30% of this entire enterprise. David looked at me, his eyes wide with rising panic. Sydney, what is the meaning of this? You assured me there was no legal injunction. I am the primary angel investor of this software firm. Thomas bellowed, puffing his chest out further and pointing a stubby finger at me. I provided the seed funding that built this place. My daughter tried to cut me out of the deal and steal my life savings, but the federal court has recognized my claim. This merger is halted until I get my fair share. Stephanie leaned over the table, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. It is over, Sydney. You thought you could just throw us away and hoard $80 million for yourself. You thought you were so much smarter than us. But we have the absolute proof. Arthur Pendleton nervously cleared his throat, trying to project authority under the gaze of 10 elite corporate lawyers. We have officially filed a federal injunction this morning in the United States District Court. Attached in this folder is a signed equity contract from 7 years ago bearing Ms. Williams' verified signature. It grants my client a full 30% ownership stake in all corporate holdings and future assets. I did not blink once. I did not even shift in my chair. I simply sat there in absolute silence and watched them eagerly dig their own federal grave deeper. My silence was misinterpreted as terror. Thomas mistook my restraint for total surrender. He slammed his hand on the table, glaring down at me with supreme victory. He thought he had me cornered in front of the most powerful people in my industry. "We can make this go away right now," Sidney Thomas said, lowering his voice into a mockingly generous tone. "You have an $80 million deal sitting on this table. We know you do not want to lose it over a public court battle. We are reasonable people." Stephanie stepped up, smiling, a razor-sharp smile. "We just want what is fair. Dad gave you the capital that started this software company. You signed the equity contract acknowledging his ownership. We will sign a release of all claims and drop the injunction today." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice completely monotone. "And what exactly is the price of this sudden familial generosity?" $20 million, Thomas declared, enunciating every syllable clearly. "A flat payout of $20 million wired into an offshore account by 3 o'clock this afternoon. You pay us and we walk out of here. The injunction disappears. The contract is dissolved and you keep your company. If you refuse, we let the court freeze every asset you possess. Your buyers walk away, your options tank, and you lose everything. The choice is yours." David, the lead acquisitions director from the conglomerate, looked appalled. He turned his severe gaze toward my lead attorney, Marshall. "Is this true? Is there an active federal injunction filed against this corporation?" Marshall maintained his poker face perfectly. "A petition for an injunction was filed this morning, David. However, the documentation supporting it is currently under review." "It is not under review," Arthur Pendleton interjected, attempting to sound seasoned. "The equity contract is legally binding. We have the digital files proving the chain of custody. If Miss Williams does not agree to the settlement terms offered, the federal judge will freeze the corporate accounts today. We hold all the leverage here." I slowly reached out my hand. "May I see the physical copy of the contract you submitted to the federal court, Mr. Pendleton?" Pendleton hesitated, glancing at Thomas for approval. Thomas gave a curt nod, his face shining with arrogant triumph. "Go ahead, Arthur. Let her see the paper that just cost her $20 million. Let her see she cannot escape this time." The lawyer slid the folder across the mahogany table. I opened it deliberately. Inside was the printed copy of the forged document. It was pathetic in physical form. The spliced signature was painfully obvious. I feigned absolute defeat. I let my shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. I played the role of the cornered victim they desperately needed me to be. "This is extortion," I said, my voice intentionally wavering just enough to sell the performance. "You are using a federal court filing to extort a massive financial payout from my company hours before a major acquisition." "It is not extortion." "Sydney." Brenda chimed in, her fake tears miraculously drying up as the prospect of $20 million became tangible. "It is securing our future. We are your parents. You owe us for everything we sacrificed for you. You should be happy to share your wealth with the people who brought you into this world." Stephanie leaned closer. "Think about it logically, Sydney. $20 million is a fraction of your payout. You will still walk away with a fortune. Why risk losing $80 million just because you are too stubborn to pay your family?" "Sign the settlement agreement," Arthur drafted. "Wire the funds. We will call the judge and withdraw the injunction before the ink is dry on your merger. It is the smartest business decision you can make right now." I looked around the room. The executives from the conglomerate were shifting uncomfortably. David was rubbing his temples, calculating the extreme risk this drama posed to his shareholders. My legal team sat perfectly still, waiting for my command. The trap was fully loaded. I just needed them to explicitly confirm the details of their federal crime on the record. "Let me be absolutely clear about the terms you are presenting," I said, my voice returning to its normal clinical authority. I looked directly at Thomas, ensuring the boardroom security cameras captured his face. "You, Thomas, are formally demanding a wire transfer of $20 million. In exchange, you will drop a federal injunction filed this morning based exclusively on the equity contract sitting right here in this folder. Is that correct?" Thomas grinned, showing his yellowed teeth. "That is exactly right. $20 million by 3 o'clock, or we burn this $80 million merger straight to the ground." "And you, Pendleton," I said to the lawyer. "You legally represent this settlement demand. You personally submitted this specific equity contract to a United States District Court judge today to secure the injunction." Pendleton puffed out his chest. I did. We are prepared to litigate if you refuse the settlement. I closed the folder and rested my hands flat on the table. The fake vulnerability I projected vanished. I sat up perfectly straight. Thank you for clarifying your exact demands, I said smoothly. And thank you for formally confirming your submission of this document to a federal judge on the official record. I wanted to ensure there was absolutely no ambiguity regarding your legal intent or your actions here today. Thomas frowned, his arrogant smile faltering slightly as he sensed the shift in my demeanor. What are you talking about? Stop stalling and sign the transfer. I am not stalling, Thomas. I replied, my voice slicing through the room with razor-sharp precision. I am simply documenting a felony. I turned my gaze away from Thomas and looked directly at David, the lead acquisitions director for the conglomerate. David, I said, my voice projecting certainty across the massive mahogany table. Please confirm the regulatory status of your holding company. Your corporate entity is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange and strictly governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, is it not? David sat up straighter, his severe corporate demeanor securely locking into place. That is correct, Sydney. We operate under total federal compliance. Acquisitions we execute are heavily scrutinized by the SEC. I nodded slowly, turning my immediate attention back to the bewildered faces of my biological family and their deeply incompetent legal representation. That is incredibly unfortunate for you, Thomas, I stated, allowing a razor-thin smile to finally break my stoic expression. Because you did not just attempt to extort a private citizen in a local civil dispute. By presenting a forged document to halt the acquisition of an SEC-regulated entity, you have elevated state-level extortion to a federal securities fraud violation. You have actively crossed the line into a Class B felony. Thomas scoffed, waving his hand. You are completely bluffing me. You are just trying to scare us because you know we have you backed into a corner. That signature is completely real. We have the emails from your old server proving it. You cannot just invent a federal crime to get out of paying your debts. Oh yes, the emails, I replied smoothly, opening my laptop and connecting it to the primary presentation system. The high-definition monitor at the far end of the boardroom flared to life. Lines of complex code IP addresses and time-stamped network logs filled the screen in glaring green text. You see, Thomas, you did not hack a vulnerable corporate server this weekend, I explained, my voice echoing clinically through the room. You walked blindly into a massive digital honeypot. I built that specific server for you to find. I wrote those highly incriminating fake emails. While you and Stephanie were illegally downloading them, my advanced tracking software logged the exact media access control address of your computer, the specific IP address of your router, and every single keystroke you made during the intrusion. Stephanie lost her arrogant smirk instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and panicked. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. That is illegal, she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical octave. You cannot just trap us like that. You broke the law by spying on us. It is perfectly legal to monitor unauthorized intrusions on my private corporate network, I corrected her sharply. What is not legal is hiring a dark web graphic designer to forge a signature on a federal legal document. Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer, looked as though he might be physically ill. He scrambled to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Miss Williams, he stammered, his professional facade crumbling. I was retained by this family to facilitate a settlement discussion. I was unaware that any of these documents were fabricated. I was told these were verified historical records. I shifted my gaze to the terrified attorney. Ignorance is a poor defense when you physically filed the fraudulent paperwork in a United States District Court, Mr. Pendleton. You submitted forged evidence to a federal judge to secure an injunction. You are now an accessory to wire fraud and extortion. If I were you, I would sit down and remain completely silent. Pendleton collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He knew his legal career was over. Thomas was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he realized the magnitude of the trap closing around him. This is a setup, he yelled, pointing at the presentation screen. You plotted against us. You made all of this up to save your merger. It is your word against ours. You cannot prove who actually downloaded those files or who drafted that contract. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood. I do not need to prove it, Thomas. The forensic data proves it. The server logs show the exact residential internet service provider used for the breach. The connection traces directly back to the wireless router in Stephanie's home. Brenda let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her chest as if experiencing a sudden medical emergency. "Sydney, please," she wailed, attempting to revive her role as the fragile mother. "We just wanted what was fair. We are your family. You cannot send your parents to federal prison over a simple misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Brenda," I stated coldly, refusing to offer her a shred of sympathy. "You attempted to steal $20 million by sabotaging my company. You brought a forged contract into a room full of elite corporate attorneys and tried to leverage a federal injunction to force a payout. You dug this grave with your own sheer greed." Stephanie looked around the room wildly, her eyes darting between the acquiring executives, my legal team, and the glaring data on the monitor. She was desperately searching for a way out, a narrative she could spin to escape accountability. "But we did not forge anything," she insisted, her voice trembling with panic. "Dad had the contract for years. We just found the emails to back it up. You are manipulating the digital records to frame us." I looked at my sister, feeling a sense of closure. She was trying to lie her way out of a trap that was already locked. She thought she could outsmart the data. But the final piece of evidence destroying her entire fabricated reality was not going to come from my laptop. It was going to walk right through the boardroom doors. "I do not need to manipulate any digital records, Stephanie," I said quietly. "The truth is already here, and it is about to dismantle your entire life." Right on cue, the heavy glass doors at the back of the executive boardroom swung open for the second time that morning. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. Andre walked in. He wore a tailored charcoal suit carrying a sleek silver briefcase. His posture was impeccably rigid. His face was a mask of professional resolve and cold anger. He looked like a man who had spent his weekend uncovering a horrific truth and had arrived to execute justice. Stephanie gasped loudly. She recoiled, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. "Andre, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "You are supposed to be at work." Andre did not look at her. He did not acknowledge Thomas or Brenda. He walked with heavy steps directly to the center of the mahogany table, stopping beside the lead acquisitions director from the conglomerate. He set his silver briefcase down, snapped the locks open, and pulled out 3 encrypted flash drives. He placed them carefully next to the forged equity contract my family had proudly presented minutes earlier. "My name is Andre," he stated, his deep voice carrying effortless authority across the room. "I am a senior financial auditor. I am also the individual whose residential internet network was illegally utilized to perpetrate a federal extortion scheme against this corporation." The corporate executives from the acquiring conglomerate leaned forward instantly. David stared at Andre with intense focus. "Are you submitting evidence regarding this injunction?" David asked, recognizing a fellow professional stepping into the fray. "I am submitting undeniable forensic proof of a massive criminal conspiracy," Andre confirmed smoothly. He finally turned his gaze toward Stephanie. His eyes were devoid of the warmth he used to hold for her. He looked at his wife the same way he would look at a corrupt ledger. "Baby, no," Stephanie pleaded, reaching her hand out across the table. Her voice pitched into a desperate whine. "Whatever she told you is a lie. Sydney is manipulating you. She is trying to tear our family apart. We are fighting for our future. Please, Andre, you have to defend me. You promised to protect me." Andre remained entirely unmoved by her performance. "I am defending the truth, Stephanie," he replied coldly. "I bypassed the security on your personal laptop Saturday night. I conducted a comprehensive digital audit of your local hard drive. I found the decoy emails you illegally downloaded from a corporate honeypot server. But more importantly, I uncovered your hidden messaging applications." Thomas jumped up from his chair, his face slick with nervous sweat. "You cannot use that. That is an illegal search of personal property. You have no right to steal her laptop data." "I have every right to investigate illicit activity occurring on a network legally registered in my name," Andre fired back, his voice booming over Thomas. He pointed firmly at the 3 flash drives resting on the table. Those drives contain the complete cloned data from Stephanie's computer. They contain the encrypted chat logs with a foreign digital mercenary based in Eastern Europe. They contain the digital receipts for a $5,000 payment made in cryptocurrency to secure a forged signature. Brenda let out a sharp cry and slumped back into her leather chair, clutching her chest. She realized the trap was completely sealed. The fake narrative they had built was collapsing under the weight of hard forensic data provided by their own son-in-law. Andre continued his systematic dismantling of their defense. The metadata on those drives proves definitively that this supposedly 30-year-old equity contract was digitally manufactured exactly 4 days ago. They scraped Sydney's signature from a publicly available tax filing. I have provided the raw files showing the exact layering process they used to construct the forgery. The lead counsel for the conglomerate picked up one of the flash drives, nodding grimly. This is exceptionally thorough work, Andre. We will hand this directly to the federal authorities today. Stephanie burst into frantic, ugly tears. She lunged forward desperately, trying to grab the flash drives, but Andre swiftly blocked her hand. Andre, please, she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I did it for us. I did it so we could buy the big house, so we could have a better life. You work so hard and she just hoards all her wealth. It is not fair. I love you. You cannot do this to your own wife. You do not love me. Stephanie, Andre, said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that cut through her hysteria. You never loved me. You profiled me. You needed a respectable man with a pristine credit score and an impeccable professional reputation to act as a shield for your parasitic lifestyle. You weaponized my home network to commit a federal felony. If the authorities had traced that IP address without my prior knowledge, my firm would have fired me instantly. I would have lost my licenses, my career, and my freedom. You were completely willing to send me to federal prison just to steal your sister's money. I watched my sister shrink back into her chair, utterly defeated. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down. There was no spinning this narrative. There was no gaslighting an entire room of corporate attorneys holding encrypted proof of her crimes. I filed the divorce papers this morning, Andre announced, delivering the final devastating blow. My lawyer served the documents to your parents' hotel while you were marching in here to extort Sydney. My name is officially off our residential lease. My bank accounts are completely severed. I am entirely done with you and your toxic family. Thomas looked wildly around the boardroom, panting heavily. He realized all the exits were mentally blocked. He turned his desperate gaze back to me. Sydney, listen. We can drop the injunction right now. We will walk away. You keep your entire company. Just walk away, I repeated, letting the absolute absurdity of his request hang in the chilled air of the boardroom. You think you can commit wire fraud, forge federal documents, attempt to extort a major corporation for $20 million, and then simply apologize and take an elevator back to the lobby. You think the federal justice system operates like a customer service desk, where you can return your felony if you change your mind. Thomas took a trembling step backward, bumping into his own leather chair. We are blood, Sydney. You cannot destroy your own family over a business deal. We will tear up the papers right now. I will swear I made a mistake. You did make a mistake, I agreed coldly. But the papers are already filed in a United States District Court. The digital footprints are already logged on a secure corporate server. The encrypted chat logs hiring a digital mercenary are already copied onto 3 separate flash drives, currently sitting on this mahogany table. You cannot unring a federal bell, Thomas, and I would not let you even if I could. I looked at the head of my corporate security team, who was standing quietly near the main entrance. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, confirming that the building perimeter was fully secured. Let them in, I instructed, my voice cutting through the rising panic in the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. The heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open for the third and final time that morning. 4 men and 2 women strode into the room with absolute terrifying purpose. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their backs. Their presence instantly drained whatever oxygen remained in the spacious room. They moved with a clinical efficiency that completely ignored the immense wealth and status surrounding them. Thomas and Stephanie, the lead agent, announced, his voice echoing with undeniable federal authority. He held up a sealed warrant, keeping his hand resting casually near his duty belt. You are both under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit extortion against a federally regulated entity. Please place your hands behind your backs immediately. The reaction was instantaneous and entirely pathetic. Thomas, the man who had marched into my headquarters demanding $20 million just 20 minutes earlier, let out a high-pitched gasp. He tried to scramble back away from the advancing agents, tripping over the thick metal legs of the conference table. "Wait," he shouted, holding his hands up in a desperate defensive gesture. "This is a massive misunderstanding. My daughter set me up. She manipulated the computer files. I am a victim here." Two federal agents stepped forward, grabbing his arms with practiced force. They spun him around, slamming his chest flat against the polished mahogany table. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the silent boardroom was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 22 years. "You have the right to remain silent," the arresting agent recited, completely ignoring his frantic sputtering. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Stephanie reacted very differently. Complete denial washed over her pampered features. She backed into the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking exactly like a trapped wild animal. "No, no, no," she wailed, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder and crashing heavily to the floor. "You cannot arrest me. I did not do anything wrong. Andre, tell them. Tell them I am completely innocent. Please, baby, do not let them take me away." Andre stood perfectly still next to the acquiring executives. He looked at the woman he had married, his face resembling carved stone. "You made your choices, Stephanie. Now you face the consequences. I am entirely done protecting you." A female agent grabbed her wrist, pulling her away from the delicate glass window. Stephanie began kicking and thrashing wildly, screaming vicious obscenities at me, at Andre, and at the arresting officers. She fought like a spoiled child denied a toy, completely unable to process that her actions finally carried severe real-world consequences. The agent expertly swept her legs, forcing her down onto her knees before securing her wrists tightly in heavy steel cuffs. Brenda, who had been sitting frozen in her chair the entire time, finally realized the absolute finality of the dire situation. Her husband and her golden child were being hauled away in handcuffs in front of a dozen elite corporate lawyers. She let out a guttural, dramatic wail and slid out of her chair onto the floor, clutching the expensive carpet. "Sydney, please stop this right now," Brenda shrieked, literally crawling toward my feet. "Tell them it is a horrible joke. Tell them to let your father go immediately. We will leave California today. We will never bother you again. I beg you, have mercy on us." I looked down at the pathetic woman who had birthed me, the woman who had watched her husband throw a 10-year-old girl into the freezing snow and done absolutely nothing to stop it. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the profound satisfaction of a perfectly closed circle. "Mercy is for people who show remorse before they get caught," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of warmth. "You only want mercy now because you completely lost the game. Stand up, Brenda. Have some dignity and walk out of my building." The federal agents hauled Thomas and Stephanie to their feet. Thomas looked entirely broken, his face pale and sweating profusely. The arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by the stark terror of a man realizing he would likely spend the rest of his natural life in a federal penitentiary. Stephanie was hyperventilating, thick mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. As they marched past the table, Thomas looked back at me. You are a monster," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I am the monster you created, Thomas," I replied, my voice carrying no malice, only the cold, hard weight of the truth. "But unlike you, I do not feed on the weak. I simply remove them from my ecosystem." The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the chaotic sounds of their arrest. The boardroom was suddenly plunged back into a pristine corporate silence. I turned smoothly back to the mahogany table, adjusting my cuffs before taking my seat. I looked directly at David and his team of executives, whose jaws were practically resting on their legal briefs. "As I promised David," I stated calmly, "the hostile threat has been fully neutralized legally and permanently. Shall we proceed with the signing?" David stared at me for a long moment before a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He picked up his gold pen. I have never seen a liability eliminated with such surgical precision, Sydney. It is an absolute privilege to do business with you. The $80 million merger was signed flawlessly 15 minutes later. But while I was popping expensive champagne with my board of directors, my biological family was experiencing the brutal reality of the federal justice system. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not operate on familial sentiment. They operate on irrefutable evidence. And I had gift-wrapped a digital mountain of it for them. The subsequent legal fallout was swift and utterly merciless. Wire fraud and federal extortion are incredibly severe crimes, heavily prosecuted to protect the integrity of financial markets. Thomas and Stephanie were denied bail during their initial arraignment. The federal judge reviewed the cloned hard drives provided by Andre, read the threatening emails they attempted to file in court, and deemed them an extreme flight risk. They spent their first weekend behind bars in standard-issue county jumpsuits, stripped of their designer clothes and their arrogant delusions. Brenda attempted to hire a high-profile defense attorney, but rapidly discovered that elite legal representation required massive upfront retainers. Without Thomas's income, and with Stephanie's retail wages completely non-existent, Brenda was effectively bankrupt overnight. They were forced to rely on an overworked public defender who took exactly one look at my forensic server logs and advised them to plead guilty immediately. Arthur Pendleton, the rented lawyer who had foolishly marched into my boardroom, faced his own swift reckoning. The State Bar Association immediately suspended his legal license pending a full ethics investigation. Faced with the threat of federal conspiracy charges, Pendleton instantly flipped on my family. He signed a comprehensive cooperation agreement with the federal prosecutors, providing sworn statements that Thomas and Stephanie had explicitly assured him the forged documents were entirely genuine. He handed over all of their private communications, completely destroying any lingering shred of attorney-client privilege. Inside the federal holding facility, Stephanie cracked first. Narcissists always turn on each other when the ship begins to sink. During her first official interrogation, she sobbed hysterically, attempting to throw Thomas completely under the bus. She claimed he masterminded the entire extortion operation, that he forced her to hire the dark web forger, and that she was merely a helpless victim of his parental authority. She desperately tried to play the role of the manipulated innocent daughter. Unfortunately for her, the digital forensic data proved otherwise. The encrypted messages on Telegram were traced directly to her unique user profile. She was the one negotiating the price of the forged signature. She was the one who downloaded the honeypot files. The federal prosecutor dismantled her victim narrative in less than 10 minutes, presenting the raw data logs showing her active, enthusiastic participation in the extortion conspiracy. Thomas, meanwhile, clung to his profound arrogance until the very end. He sat in the interrogation room insisting that he was the rightful owner of my software company. He demanded the federal prosecutors arrest me for trapping him. He genuinely believed that his status as a father somehow superseded federal law. His public defender eventually had to aggressively explain that arguing parental entitlement against a Class B felony charge would only infuriate the presiding judge and likely double his prison sentence. Faced with absolute airtight forensic evidence, the devastating testimony provided by Andre and the sworn cooperation of their own lawyer, both Thomas and Stephanie eventually signed plea agreements to avoid a lengthy and embarrassing public trial. 6 months after the dramatic boardroom arrest, I sat in the back row of a federal courtroom to watch the final sentencing. I wore a sharp black suit, remaining completely silent and observant. The judge looked down from the bench with absolute contempt. Thomas appeared frail and defeated, his shoulders hunched, his hair unkempt. Stephanie looked hollow, her previous glamorous aura entirely vanished. The judge did not mince words. He called their actions a staggering display of greed and a gross manipulation of the federal court system. He noted that their attempt to extort a highly successful relative using falsified documents demonstrated a complete lack of moral character. He specifically highlighted how they had weaponized the judicial system for personal financial gain, wasting federal resources, and attempting to sabotage legitimate corporate commerce. The gavel came down with a heavy final crack. Thomas and Stephanie were each sentenced to 60 months, a full 5 years, in a federal penitentiary. They were additionally ordered to pay severe financial restitution for the legal costs incurred by the corporate entities they attempted to defraud. As the armed bailiffs moved in to escort them away to begin their sentences, Thomas did not look back at me. His spirit was completely broken by the reality of a concrete cell. Stephanie, however, turned her head, searching the gallery until her eyes locked onto mine. There was no apology in her gaze, only a desperate, fearful realization of her new reality. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply maintained intense, unblinking eye contact until the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom closed behind her, locking her away from society. Justice had been served, cold and exact. I walked out of the federal courthouse and stepped into the bright California sunlight. The air felt incredibly clean. The toxic anchor that had dragged behind me for my entire existence was finally legally severed. But there was still one loose end remaining. Brenda was still out there, grasping at straws, completely unwilling to accept that her golden era was permanently over. And she was about to make one final desperate mistake by coming directly to me. The next morning, my front gate intercom buzzed. I was reviewing plans for the $80 million merger. I glanced at the monitor. Standing in the rain, stripped of her glamour, was Brenda. Her designer clothes were replaced by a wrinkled trench coat. She looked frantic, holding a crumpled paper I recognized as a bank foreclosure notice. I pressed the audio button on the console. "State your business, Brenda." "Sydney, please." Her voice cracked over the audio feed. "You have to let me inside. I am freezing out here. The bank is taking the house. Thomas is in a federal cell. Stephanie is gone. I have nothing left. I have nowhere else to go. You are my daughter. You have to help me." I did not press the release button. Instead, I grabbed an umbrella, walked out my front door, and strolled down the paved driveway toward the iron gates. I wanted to look her in the eyes for this final interaction. I wanted her to see the void where a daughter's love was supposed to be. When I reached the gate, I did not open it. I stood dry under my black umbrella while she stood on the other side, shivering in the cold air. "Look at me, Sydney," Brenda pleaded, pressing her hands against the wet gate. Her makeup was running down her cheeks. "I am an old woman. I am completely destitute. You won $14 million from your merger. You live in a palace. You can afford to buy me a condo. You can afford a monthly stipend. It would not even make a dent in your wealth. You cannot just leave your mother on the street. It is unnatural." I looked at her. "Do you remember December of 22 years ago, Brenda?" She blinked, confused by the sudden shift in the conversation. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the night you and Thomas decided I was a curse," I said, my voice completely flat. "I am talking about the night you watched your husband drag a 10-year-old girl to the front door and throw her out into a freezing Chicago snowstorm. I am talking about the moment you personally tossed a garbage bag containing my cheap clothing out onto the icy concrete, locked the deadbolt, and turned off the porch light." Brenda gasped, her eyes darting away from mine. "We were under a lot of stress. Thomas was bankrupt. We were not thinking clearly. We made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting a utility bill," I corrected her sharply. "Throwing a child into a snowstorm to freeze is attempted murder by neglect. You stood in your warm house and watched me walk into the dark. You did not call the police. You did not call a relative. You simply went to sleep. If Aunt Beverly had not found me, I would have died of hypothermia before sunrise." "I was afraid of Thomas," she sobbed. "You know how angry he could get. I had to support my husband. I had to protect Stephanie. I was just trying to keep the family together." "You protected your own comfort," I stated. "You sacrificed me because I was the easiest target. For 22 years, you never looked back. You never checked if I was alive. You only remembered you had a second daughter when my face appeared on Forbes magazine. You did not come here today because you love me. You came here because your primary financial host is sitting in a federal penitentiary. Your golden child is locked in a cell beside him, and you are looking for a new victim to fund your existence." "Blood is thicker than water," she cried out. her voice pitching into a hysterical wail. "We share the same blood, Sydney. You cannot deny your own family. You will be cursed if you turn your back on your mother. God will punish you." I let out a short laugh. "Your blood froze in my veins the night you threw me into the snow, Brenda. The family I had was Aunt Beverly. The family I have now are the people I choose to surround myself with, people who operate with integrity. You are merely a biological coincidence, and a highly unfortunate one at that. Sydney, I am begging you," she wailed, sinking to her knees. "I will do whatever you want. I will apologize publicly. I will clean your house. Just do not let me die in a homeless shelter. Have some mercy on your mother." I stared down at her kneeling in the rain. She wanted mercy. She wanted the unconditional love she systematically denied me my entire life. She wanted me to adhere to a familial duty that she had violently broken decades ago. "Mercy is reserved for people who demonstrate basic human decency," I said, my voice echoing over the rain. "You showed me no mercy when I was a helpless child. You showed me no mercy when you walked into my corporate boardroom with forged federal documents intending to steal my life's work. You showed me no mercy when you attempted to destroy my reputation in the press. You made your choices, Brenda. Now you get to live the rest of your life experiencing the exact same isolation you inflicted on me." I turned my back on her and began walking up the paved driveway toward my home. "Sydney," she screamed, rattling the gate violently. "Come back here. You owe me your life." I stopped looking back. "I owed you nothing the moment you locked that door 22 years ago. Never return. The police will arrest you for trespassing. Have a very nice life, Brenda." I kept walking. The sound of her desperate sobbing slowly faded into the background noise of the rain. I walked inside, engaged the deadbolts, and smiled. The final cord was completely severed. The toxic infection that plagued my history was amputated. I was finally and completely free. The silence inside my home was no longer the heavy, oppressive quiet of a child waiting for the next screaming match. It was the pristine, golden silence of absolute security. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee, and watched the heavy rain wash the concrete driveway clean. The storm outside was fierce, but it could not touch me anymore. The fortress I had meticulously built around my life was entirely impenetrable. Over the next several months, the $80 million corporate merger integrated flawlessly. The acquiring conglomerate was deeply impressed by my rigorous risk management and uncompromising crisis resolution protocols. My personal payout secured my financial independence for 10 lifetimes over. But the true wealth was not the staggering number of zeros sitting in my diversified investment accounts. It was the undeniable reality that nobody could ever leverage my success against me again. I had taken the worst possible familial betrayal and transformed it into an ironclad foundation of power. I occasionally kept track of the only other survivor of this entire ordeal. Andre finalized his divorce with brutal, efficient speed. Without Stephanie draining his bank accounts and manipulating his reality, his professional career skyrocketed. He accepted a highly lucrative executive position as the chief compliance officer for a major financial institution in New York. We exchanged a single brief email around the winter holidays. It was a simple professional message of mutual respect between two individuals who stared directly into the dark abyss of corporate fraud and chose absolute integrity. I was thriving in his new environment, and I genuinely wished him the absolute best. With the massive corporate transition fully complete, I turned my undivided attention to the single most important legacy project of my entire life. I purchased a sprawling commercial building in the heart of downtown Chicago, not far from the exact suburban streets where I had once wandered freezing and alone. I hired top-tier commercial architects and passionate educators to completely gut and rebuild the interior space. 6 months later, we officially opened the heavy glass doors to the Aunt Beverly Foundation. It was not a shallow corporate vanity project or a simple tax write-off. It was a highly specialized technology academy designed exclusively for foster children and youth who had been abandoned by their biological parents. Aunt Beverly had saved my life by giving me a safe, warm home and purchasing a cheap secondhand computer. She gave me the digital tools to build my own escape hatch from a miserable existence. The foundation was specifically designed to multiply her profound kindness on an industrial scale. We provided state-of-the-art laptops, advanced coding boot camps, cybersecurity training, and full-ride university scholarships to teenagers whom society and their own parents had completely written off. Every single time I walked through the brightly lit halls of the academy, watching determined kids write their first lines of software code, I felt Beverly smiling down at me. She was the real family legacy I chose to carry forward. Looking back at the chaotic wreckage of my biological family, I feel absolutely no regret. People in polite society often ask how I can live with the cold decision to send my own blood relatives to a federal penitentiary and leave my mother utterly destitute. Society places a massive toxic burden on children to forgive the unforgivable simply because of shared DNA. We are aggressively conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable sacred bond that demands infinite second chances and constant financial bailouts. That is a dangerous, manipulative lie designed entirely to protect abusers from facing the consequences of their own actions. Blood is nothing more than a random biological coincidence. It does not entitle anyone to your hard-earned resources, your mental health, or your emotional peace of mind. True family is not a noun, it is a verb. It is the active, continuous daily choice to show up, protect, and value someone. Thomas, Brenda, and Stephanie chose blind greed. They chose illegal exploitation. They viewed me as a disposable object until the exact moment I became a highly profitable asset. They dug their own federal graves with their bare hands, and I simply handed them the shovels when they asked for them. I learned the hardest way possible that true success is not just about accumulating massive wealth or securing prestigious corporate titles. True success is possessing the sheer, unyielding courage to amputate the toxic infections from your life without a single ounce of apology or hesitation. It is about recognizing your own absolute worth and building walls high enough that emotional parasites can never scale them. You do not owe your abusers forgiveness. You owe yourself permanent safety. You owe yourself a beautiful life, completely free from the suffocating weight of narcissistic manipulation. If you are trapped in a vicious cycle of family toxicity, waiting patiently for them to magically change and recognize your true value, you will wait forever. They will never change their behavior. You have to be the one to break the heavy chain. You have to gather your evidence, secure your personal resources, and walk away without ever looking back. Do not let anyone convince you that protecting your peace makes you the villain of the story. You are the sole author of your own existence. Make sure you are writing a story where you win. Have you ever found yourself dealing with a toxic relative who felt entirely entitled to your success? Have you ever had to establish an unbreakable boundary to protect your own mental and financial well-being? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences matter immensely, and sharing them helps others realize they are not alone in this battle. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for joining me. Remember, your peace is sacred, and your future is entirely